from Vancouver West End.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Well, I'm almost speechless, Honourable Speaker. Speechless, but no, you don't get that benefit of a whole lot of silence because there's so much to say. There's so much to say about why this is necessary. Members on the opposite side of the House and members on my side of the House probably can start to guess what I might say, as I've said it a few times before in this legislature. They might be able to repeat some of the arguments I've made before, but for the benefit of those who didn't get to hear them, I will make the case once more of why this legislation is so important. Imagine, Honourable Speaker, if you will, going for a job interview, and the person looks at you and says, "Oh, no, I'm not going to hire you because of how you look, because of who you are." Imagine going for housing. You've got it. In this low vacancy world we live in right now, where it's really difficult to find an affordable place to live, and you find that housing. You've made the call, you made the email, you connected, you've looked at references, and you get to the door, or you make the phone call and they listen to your voice, and they think you don't sound like they think you should sound like, or you don't look how they want you to look like, because you are transgender, and they believe it's their right to discriminate against you because of who you are. Unfortunately, Honourable Speaker, those stories happen all the time in BC, across Canada, across this world, where people have taken their ignorance, and in some cases their hatred, out in a discriminatory way. Now, as I've said from the beginning about why we need this legislation is, yes, judges may have interpreted our Human Rights Code to read gender identity or expression, but I bet you, Honourable Speaker, if you talk to the average citizen in BC today, they wouldn't know that. And most importantly, if you talk to somebody who's transgender or gender variant, many of them would tell you that no, when reading the Human Rights Code, it does not say gender identity, it does not say gender expression. But, Honourable Speaker, if we pass this legislation today, it will finally be there in black and white, so that when you read the Human Rights Code, you know you're protected. When an employer reads the Human Rights Code, or a landlord, or an elementary school student when reading about the law, they will know that transgender people are protected. Because, Honourable Speaker, it is impossible to enact a law, to enforce a law, to call for help to enforce a law, if you don't know that the law is there to protect you. And that's why I'm so glad that finally, this will be the fifth time lucky charm, Honourable Speaker. Normally it was third time, I said, but no, it takes 5 times sometimes before we get change. This time the government will be introducing this legislation, has introduced this legislation, and has indicated they will make this law. And it gives me great pleasure that they have heard, finally heard the winds of change, finally heard from those who've been pleading for years and years and years for action. Because this is not just about changing a law and we'll leave it there. This is about changing a law so we can help change a culture to be one that's more inclusive, one that's more accepting, one that embraces difference and diversity. Honourable Speaker, gender's a tough issue. We have lots of issues in gender, whether or not it's sexism, whether or not it's misogyny, whether or not it's being critical of somebody because they look too masculine, they look too feminine, they don't look like your version of what a boy or a man or a woman or a girl or somebody who doesn't fit in any of those categories look like. And it's hard, Honourable Speaker. Somebody said, well, if you're going to talk about this legislation, you can't just talk about what transgender people have told you about why we need it. You need to talk about why it matters to you as well. Well, it matters to me, obviously, because too many of my friends have been hurt because they are different. It matters to me because too many people have faced incredible losses in their personal lives, of housing, of employment, of family members, because they are trans or they just don't fit the gender binaries as they're supposed to. But I was thinking about it, going, well, what's my earliest memories of gender? What was my earliest memories of going, well, things, maybe can be a little different? Well, I think many of us will have memories of elementary school where somebody told you should be not quite how you were. Well, I got to tell you, Honourable Speaker, some of the boys in my elementary school were dirty. They enjoyed playing in the muck. They enjoyed pushing people around, a little rough and tumble. I can do that. I'm good at that. But you know, sometimes the girls were just smarter, Honorable Speaker. Sometimes they just had a little bit more to offer in terms of a conversation. And so I hung out with them sometimes, which of course got the charge of the other young boys saying, oh, you're too much of a girly man, and those kinds of things. I took it in stride, whatever. I wasn't going to let them try and change who I am as a person and the things that I enjoy. Eventually the boys smartened up. It takes us a bit longer. We mature a little bit later sometimes. But you know, now I'm comfortable with everybody. So I can be the macho man, I can be the girly man. It all happens sometimes in the world of the wonderful diversity that I like to live. But for too many, those instances can shut them down. Those instances of somebody trying to enforce how you're supposed to be makes them give up. For too many, that can be the breaking point of them having confidence in going out in the world and them saying, well, I'm different, nobody likes me, nobody loves me, I shouldn't exist. And unfortunately, Honorable Speaker, that's why we know that there are still many people who can't live life the way they are. That's why we know suicide remains as something that kills far too many in our society, particularly transgender and gender variant people. Because we as a culture have not changed to embrace that full diversity yet. We're changing laws. Even though we're not leaders in Canada in terms of changing this law, we'll be the third last province to act. But we can become leaders, Honorable Speaker. And so I'm going to take this opportunity to call on us all to look at what more we can do, what more we can change. Because, you know, lately it's become a trend to apologize for things governments have done 40 years, 50 years, 100 years ago, because we recognize that in order to change, we have to recognize where we've done wrong in the past, learn from those lessons, and then resolve to do better. Well, sometimes, Honorable Speaker, I think we need to, rather than wait 40 years, we should change now. We know that there's still too many people who face hatred for who they are, and we could act in a number of ways. In our schools, as I know my friend across the way, North Vancouver Seymour, as well as my colleague from the Stikine, who's the vice chair of a standing committee on children and youth, they called for explicit protections, explicit policy in our school system to make sure that every kid that goes through a BC school has the support, has the knowledge, has the acceptance and the education to embrace diversity in all its many forms, particularly in this case due to the high level of violence faced by lesbian, gay, bi, and trans kids. The focus was there. Dr. Elizabeth Sawick, who was here earlier with us today, has incredible research which shows if we bring in explicit policies, not only do schools get safer for LGBT kids, they become safer for all kids, and all kids prosper. And you know, as a New Democrat, that's always been my belief in terms of how we should live in society. If one person suffers, chances are there's somebody else suffering too. Chances are that then extends out to all of us. There's no person is an island, no man is an island, as that great poem goes. No, in fact, we are all connected, as any good scientist would tell you. We all have that connection now, and we have to work with that understanding. So how did we get here, Honorable Speaker? If you'll forgive me, I have to do a little bit of history of how we came to this great day, this historic day for BC. Well, I asked the Legislative Library to help me out. When was the first time the word transsexual was ever said in this legislature? Well, it would surprise you. It actually was way back in 1973. In 1973, the NDP was arguing that for a change in the law so that if somebody underwent gender reassignment surgery, their IDs could be changed to match their gender, something which, after much to and fro, was passed, and that law became law for BC. And in an interesting note, Honorable Speaker, I think it was just last year or the year before, we just updated that law over 30 years later well, actually more than 40 years later, oh boy, to actually say that the surgery didn't necessarily have to happen, because we know, and I think there are some in the House today who know that very personally, that sometimes when you're a very young person, that kind of surgery is too much, and your birth certificate should match who you are as a person, no matter what the surgery might say or medical doctors might try and force onto you. We need to recognize the whole person and where they came from. So we did update that law most recently. That was the first time. When did gender identity first enter the debate in this House? Well, it came back in 1988. And again, it was a New Democrat making the case for reassignment surgery to help people feel their full person as they need to be. Later, when did transgender enter this House? First time was 1996 when one of my predecessors as MLAs, Tim Stevenson, spoke with pride about the transgender community in the neighborhood we live in the West End. So on and on. But when did the first call really in this House come for pushing for human rights changes to the BC Human Rights Code? Well, it actually goes to my colleague Shane from Vancouver Hastings in bringing a petition forward from his constituents calling for gender identity and expression to be put into this legislature and into legislation. I think that was in 2010. 2011, I brought a private member's bill for the first time to do that, and then 3 times after that. There's a quote that's often been attributed to Gandhi. I don't think it was actually him that said it, but an incredible leader, so let's attach it to him. First they ignore you, then they mock you, then they attack you, then you win. Well, that's somewhat what it felt like for me in going through this journey. The first time I moved the legislation, the petition came to the House, there was no response. Nobody said nothing. There was almost, there were a few stories in the media. I think it was myself and a woman named Marie Little from the Trans Alliance Society standing here saying, let's act. Well, just 2 of us. And the next time, we had some more of us. I think I got a nice note back from the Attorney General at the time saying, well, thank you for your work for human rights. We will consider doing this in the next time we consider the Human Rights Code. So, okay, so they're not ignoring me now. Maybe getting into a bit of a ridicule. How, Honorable Speaker? Because I wrote back to the Attorney General at that time and said, so you're going to consider doing this the next time you consider changing the Human Rights Code. So when's that going to be? Well, what was the response, Honorable Speaker? We have no plans to actually consider changing the Human Rights Code. Now, this was back in 2011, so it's not the current Attorney General, but that was the time then. So when did the attack come? Well, Honorable Speaker, sometimes we do things we don't mean, and this spring, I was told in this House that there were 2 problems transgender people face in BC, incredible rates of violence and discrimination, and myself. Apparently, I was a problem, according to the words of the other side, for continually raising the need to address gender identity and expression in the Human Rights Code. I've always been clear, Honorable Speaker, that judges have read it into the law, but you can't defend yourself if you don't see yourself in the law. And that's the problem that we are fixing today. So there was the attack, and then just this last week, we had a reach out, and a really good reach out. And I'm really glad that the government did do the outreach to say, maybe things didn't need to quite go the way they did. And a desire to fix them. A desire, and I think I give great credit to our trans allies of trans community, but transgender people themselves who called members opposite, who called members on this side, who called the minister, who organized meetings, who did emails, who did petitions, who shared very personal stories about why we needed to change and what it meant to them. And that worked, Honorable Speaker. That's how this place should work. When community reaches out with needs, we as members listen, we work together, and we come to a solution. So it gave me great pride to stand with the minister responsible for the Attorney General, on Wednesday last week, to say we were uniting in support of this legislation. This has been the dream, I think, of many, that we as a House could come to unity on this. This certainly was my hope from the beginning, because when we speak loudly as a House, as a legislature, as the governing body for the people of this great province, our voice carries weight. And Honorable Speaker, when I have people calling me now saying they feel for the first time like a full person, like somebody has decided no longer are you an aberration, no longer are you something on the sidelines that is not acknowledged, not spoken of. No, you are a person in entirety, in full meaning, in full worth, in full value. That's a pretty incredible thing. That's a pretty incredible thing for that person to share and for us to be able to do. But Honorable Speaker, I'll just finish this by saying human rights are won. They're not given. None of us are here giving somebody a human right. They're won because these people deserve that right. It was their right, I would argue, from the beginning. We are merely catching up. We are merely catching up to say, you're right. We should have acknowledged that before. You are a full human. You are loved. You are celebrated. And so to all the haters out there, and there are haters, I get the emails, I get the tweets, and I'm sure there'll be some today. Look in your heart. Find a little love. Find a little appreciation for difference. Ask yourself some questions. If you've got such hatred in your heart, there's got to be something in there. Pull that rock out of your shoe. Find some love. Find somebody to tell you you're a good person. Because, you know, we all should be loved. And I believe firmly in my heart that 100 years from now we'll be looking at this going, what the heck was the problem? Why were they even having to have this debate? Surely we could acknowledge that we're wonderful in our diversity, in our majesty, in our magnificence of how different and wonderful we can be. And we're united in celebrating that. So I'm very happy to be here today. I want to acknowledge all those who have gone before, many whose names that we will never mention in this house because we don't know them. People who called back in the 80s, the 90s, 2000s, 2010 onwards for this kind of support, who called for this kind of legislation, may not have used the exact words we're using today, but they're the heroes that this is built upon. They're the ones that have made this victory possible. Because us as legislators, we're mere vessels sometimes for the whims, the desires, sometimes whims, but often it's the heartfelt desires for change that we can take action and take leadership for. We should be leaders here, but in the end, Honorable Speaker, it's our communities who lead. And I want to thank and acknowledge every one of those community leaders out there. And if I start a long list, I'm going to get in a lot of trouble because there's a long, long list. But I want to give other legislators a chance to speak today, not go on much longer, because I think it's important that we all get the opportunity to share why this matters to us so that we can then live that value every day in our communities. It's great. We're going to pass this bill in one day. All goes according to plan. That's historic in itself, and I think sends a very strong message of unity and sends a strong message of acceptance, and that hopefully the next time the community reaches out for help, that we will be there much, much faster and be there in a proactive way, speaking strongly with one voice for diversity, for transgender human rights, and for the British Columbia that we all want to live in. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.